Good morning. I'm here to address the vinyl community. I'm on a chapter called Summit at Paramount about Paramount Studios. During the course of our hour-long conversation with Gutowski, we heard the following allegations. One, shortly after Tex Watson's midnight arrival at Cielo Drive on August 8, 1969, a stoned Gutowski called his friend and roommate, the artist Witold Kazanowski, otherwise known as Witold K, was staying at Abigail Folger's Woodstock Roadhouse. During the brief call, a slurring Gutowski attempted to describe a problematic situation that was developing there as the result of a drug deal in progress, and invited him to come over. Witold K did relate this call to the LAPD when interviewed, but he didn't tell them that a violent situation was already brewing. Gutowski claimed that he later learned through his own high-ranking intelligence contacts that Kazanowski was pressured to act as an FBI informant. In that capacity, he was charged with reporting to the feds on their other Polish immigrants congregated around the 100 Cielo Drive scene. Gutowski discovered that many of the Poles in the circle were under surveillance in this paranoid Cold War times, not only about suspected espionage, but in relation to their environment in unprecedented criminal activity. This created a stifling atmosphere of paranoia. After the murders, he and his fellow immigrants sought to elude what he referred to as the LAPD secret police squad. He relied on this experience, slipping under the radar of secret police during the war to avoid the snooping Polish exiles he was subject to. Strategy could only be discussed at walks outdoors or at noisy locations less easy to monitor. The main goal was to prevent their friends who knew that Sebring and Gutowski were up from talking to the detectives. The semi cooperated with the police event as they misled them. Even one of Polanski's friends from the time corroborated this, stating that the director seemed more interested in controlling what they said about Gutowski and Sebring's drug dealings than actually solving the crime. One former girlfriend of Polanski's and Sebring's told me that a few days after the murders, Polanski called her from a well-known Hollywood call girl's place of business to coldly quiz her on what she told the police. Gutowski surmised that Kazanowski immediately, and that's Gutowski's roommate, Kazanowski. Gutowski summarized that Kazanowski immediately informed his superiors about what he knew, setting up a cover-up in motion primarily intended to protect the federal investigation from being blown. Although not in reference to Kazanowski, other sources unwilling to be identified have confirmed that not only Cielo but Waverly were under surveillance for reasons not entirely clear. 2. That Polanski's initial reaction to news of the murders had never been reported accurately. I asked Gutowski if his folklore is true that at a cocktail party earlier that night, Polanski's response to hearing of the death of a friend was to say, "Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, who will be the next to go?" He said he could not recall if that was accurate or not, but that was prompted him to recall how in the early evening London time that night, Polanski's close friend and collaborator, Andy Bronsberg, telephoned Gutowski, urged him to rush to Roman's home immediately. He arrived shortly after Polanski's agent, William Tennant, called after identifying the mutilated bodies at Cielo Drive. Polanski had been preparing to join the Playboys Victor Lones, Lownes, for supper. According to Gutowski's allegations, after the director arrived at his flat and observed what had happened, Polanski's immediate response to learning of the disaster at his home was to outright angrily blurt out, "I told Jay to stay away from those fuckers in Chatsworth." Chatsworth, of course, being the site of Swan Ranch. I asked Gutowski if he knew of rumors that the Mamas and Papas founder, John Phillips, had introduced Manson and his woman to Polanski at a get-together at Dennis Wilson's Malibu home. He said that he had no knowledge of Polanski ever personally meeting any of the Manson commune. Whether he would have admitted it, that if it true, I cannot say. For all of his blunt honesty, there were clearly many no-go areas. He confirmed that Polanski, who he recalled as understandably paranoid at that time, later came to suspect many others of the crime, including his friends Bruce Lee and John Phillips, and also several others he preferred not to name. He recalled Polanski and John Phillips going to Jamaica at the end of August to check out other leads they had on Frutowski's drug contacts, a scenario hard to coordinate with Polanski's suspicion that Phillips had killed his wife. The story Polanski and Phillips both told that this suspicion was based on the idea that Phillips' motive would have been found that Polanski enjoyed a one-night stand with Phillips's wife, Michelle, has never made sense, since that was common, even expected practice in the circle of self-confessed swingers and free love advocates. Did Polanski suspect Phillips because he knew he had been at the crime scene hours before the Polanski housekeeper, Winifred Chapman, altered the police to the massacre? Grotowski was certain, after doing some snooping of his own, with a little help from his friends in high places, that Sebring and Frutowski had multiple meetings with hippie types who were later revealed to be Charles Watson and other commune members. Grotowski's immediate suspicion centered on the eminently likely possibility that some of the visitors were moved to violence by Sebring's mounting debts and or Frutowski's capricious sudden entry into narcotics trafficking, and he still wondered if Tex had been hired by a powerful organized crime ring during to remove Frutowski from competing with them. 3. That when a heavily tranquilized Polanski arrived at Los Angeles the day after the murders, their friend would told Kazanowski, Frutowski's roommate, as I mentioned before, intercepted the director and Grotowski at the discrete location. There, Kazanowski told them about Frutowski's drug dealings going on that weekend right before the murders took place. He recalled the meeting held that he and Polanski were still jet-lagged from their emergency flight from London and having the air of a Cold War spy thriller. However, what We Told Kay told Polanski wasn't entirely true. He directed suspicion for the murders on 3 other drug dealers known to have issues with Frutowski. Although We Told Kay did not know the names, he said he could recognize them by sight as they were frequent hostile visitors of his roommate Frutowski. His threatening trio were Mama Cass's associates, Billy Doyle, Pick Dawson, and Tommy Harrigan. The industrious hustlers were suspected to many of Frutowski's social circle and were interrogated by the police. Although We Told Kay was more directly informed, Tinseltown whispered about the open secret of Frutowski's shocking rape of Billy Doyle at Cielo Drive. Music business insider Sally Stevens, Elektra Records publicity director who once encountered Charlie sermonizing at a party, told author Michael Walker the rock and roll hypocrisy of all thought at first it was a big dope dealer who was revenging himself on people. There was this one guy, a boyfriend of Cass Elliott's. Everyone thought it was him, and he fled for Algiers or something. In 2016, an entry into her blog, Stevens recalls that Pick Dawson was the main subject. Doyle and company were soon named in the international press as prime suspects, but were let go for lack of evidence. That Doyle, Dawson, and Harrigan were cleared of the actual murders doesn't necessarily mean that they had nothing to do with the crime. In all the interviews they provided police, they certainly knowingly lied about one important piece of information. One of the most likely Harrigan, had delivered a large amount of DMDA pressed into pills to Frutowski the day before the killings. Where did these pills go from the morning of August 9th? The official narrative, when it touches on these 3 in passing, usually states that they had firm alibis and were not in Los Angeles at the time of the murders. In fact, the police never established their whereabouts. And we do know that Harrigan stopped by Cielo to talk to drugs with Frutowski on the 7th of August. The extent to which the threesome knew Watson and company remained a mystery. What's not in doubt is that their dealings with Vitowski helped to precipitate the murders. Furthermore, the crime scene was deliberately arranged to frame them, a ploy which at least temporarily worked. This proves that at least some of the sponsters involved knew enough about illegal goings-on at Cielo Drive to engineer a credibly effective framing scenario. And yet, although information about much of this shady trio's involvement with Vitowski was widely disseminated in the weeks after the murders, this cruel layer has been inexplicably overlooked and underplayed for decades. Bugliosi referred to the three in passing under pseudonyms in Helter Skelter, but as with his brief token mention of detectives looking into Lino LaBianca's mafia links, he only raises these early suspects to dismiss the relevance of drugs and the mob to the case, and because they'd been mentioned extensively by the press before he sought to justify the cover story in his book, it's interesting that author Tom O'Neill, despite his fervent anti-Bugliosi stance, does the same thing in Chaos as in Helter Skelter. The disinformation screen he rightly debunks. O'Neill even goes into the trouble of taking down these crucial players in a setup of the crime to dismiss the pertinence in favor of the tenuous theory of CIA malfeasance. This is where I would have a problem with Tom O'Neill about the CIA's involvement in this. The LAPD took the involvement of Doyle, Dawson, and Harrigan seriously enough to marshal their resources to investigate a major dope ring in Jamaica the three suspects were involved with. Whether this was a dead end or if the Jamaica connection did a role in the crime remains unknown. All mention of the enterprises vanished once the focus shifted as a cult of brainwashed hippies. We told Kay, in fear of his own life, told Kwiatkowski and Polanski that Vitowski was anxious of reprisal for some unnamed misdeed from some unknown parties in the last weeks of his life. It is usually this unholy three that he suspected. Reminds me of the unholy seven that Bob McElwain represented. That's another story. The unholy three that he suspected, but it is impossible that Wojciech was also referring to the angry Watson and Kasabian, who he had burned. John Phillips was described Vitowski's fear in the days before he died, but we know that he was self-protectively selective in the little that he made public. Kazanowski confirmed that many others who visited Vitowski at Cielo Drive reported for months while Sharon and Roman were away in Europe, unsavory sweet hippies and their undesirables drifted into the house at all hours. It didn't take long for Polanski's friends to express their suspicions that Vitowski's rape and beatings of Billy Doyle was one of the most likely motivations for murder. Well, don't we have witnesses to that? Although Sebring didn't lack for his own formidable array of enemies, other strangers Vitowski invited to Polanski's, where the director was away, Kwiatkowski discovered were what he described as pushers connected to the drug dealing operation Sebring's hair salon almost conspicuously fronted. The risks Kwiatkowski and to a lesser extent Sebring were talking were obvious to the point of predictability. The amount of shifty characters they were at Polanski's house on the afternoon and evening of the crime, Kwiatkowski said he had never been revealed to the Satanized accounts made public by the police and press. Among those victims' names remembered at being present on the day of the murders were the previously mentioned Ed Durston and his partner, Diane Linkletter's boyfriend, Harvey Dareff, Dareff, of whom the more later Ian Courier was another. But there was no end of suspects, many of them only by nicknames or physical descriptions. In Polanski's police interview with the homicide detective Earl Deemer, shortly after he arrived in L.A., he eerily rattles off several large debts Sebring owed at the time of his death. Colonel Tate, in the course of his investigation, estimated that Sebring owed $250,000 to many of the known and unknown parties he had taken loans from. Kwiatkowski recalled with detailed credibility that we told Kay held the secret rendezvous conversations about Frutowski at a phone booth in a diner parking lot. Other sources state that the artist was brought to Polanski's well-guarded refuge at Paramount Studios by a police escort, so terrified that the information he knew could get him killed. Shortly thereafter, Whittle K participated in yet another odd wing of the investigation, what seems like a breach of police protocol that tends to support Gutowski's allegations that he was an informant. The civilian Whittle K accompanied detectives on interviews to the addresses of possible sources of information listed in Frutowski's coded notebooks. Throughout the investigation of the case, it is yet another anomaly of this mystery. Civilians and law enforcement work together to an unprecedented manner. This is where we're going to stop here because this is a long chapter. They're going to be going into so many gangsters. Sidney Korshak. We're going into serious gangsters. Frank Costello. Trafficani. These are the people that murdered the president, man. From Spawn Ranch to the people that murdered the president. The people getting the dots connected yet? God bless all my friends and enemies, and God bless the people that are innocent in these crimes, and let them pray that they find peace in their lives, and God bless the children in the vinyl community. This is going to be a 3-part chapter.